Hello, my friends, and welcome to yet another book review with your buddy John Henry Sheridan. Okay, today we're talking about AC/DC, Maximum Rock and Roll, the ultimate story of the world's greatest rock and roll band, by Murray Engleheart and Arnaud Durieux, Durieux. The most authoritative AC/DC book to date, says Billboard Australia. I can't imagine how you're gonna outdo this book on AC/DC anyway. So, man, it wasn't exactly that I couldn't put it down, because I'm the type of person that likes to read in a process a little bit each day. But pretty much I want to read at least a chapter a day because it was just so easy to read. And I like to take time with books, but I really couldn't take time with this. Sometimes books take me weeks. Some books take me months and years. They're just kind of on the side, and I just don't want to give up on them, but I can't take too much at once. But this one, I would say over a week, maybe 2 weeks, but yeah, for 400, I don't know. Yeah, 456 pages, and then plus discography and all that other stuff. Yeah, so close to 500-page book. So in 2 weeks, easy as a breeze. And of course, there are photos and stuff. Okay, so what can I say? If you're an AC/DC fan and you like to read, and you haven't read this yet, there's no reason why not to. I got myself a used copy as per usual. I go to thriftbooks.com, try to keep, other companies getting my business besides just the big one, the biggest one. Man, yeah, used books, I love doing it that way. It's a good way, I think. I would do the library, but, you can't really choose what you want in the library. You kind of, unless you order books, whatever. I'm not there yet, nor may I ever be, but ordering on thriftbooks.com works for me. Used books, cheapest I can get, as long as I can read it and the print's not too small. Print perfectly fine. I will say, being a used book, sometimes some pages, like a photos page, might fall out. So I just have to keep track of that and not lose it through the reading of it. But afterwards, you just stick it in, and it's a little big. And I like to sit on the couch, legs folded, and read. So that was a little challenging, but man, it goes, at a certain point, it just starts going like album by album. Each chapter is an album. And for a good period of their early career, like each album kind of represented 1 year, roughly. The album, the making of the album, the touring of it, that whole thing. The 70s was definitely much more of a go machine, let's conquer the world. And the 80s, they already kind of did conquer the world. By like 1980, that was the breakout Back in Black album, and then the biggest tour ever, and then the tour after that, For Those About to Rock, got even bigger, 81, 82. So what can I say about it? I've been a long-time AC/DC fan since probably 11 years old or something like that, which would be 92. 92 is when AC/DC Live came out. Their show in Castle Donington, a huge live album at the time, and surprisingly, it was their second official live album to date, I believe, at that point, and they were already like 16, 17 years into their career, and that was their second live album. They were always hesitating they never liked to do compilation stuff. There's no greatest hits of AC/DC out there. There are things that are compilations that eventually relented, and there are a few of those, but no like AC/DC greatest hits album. They didn't want to resell the same material to the fans in a different package. They ended up doing it a few times, but they were against it for many years, and until it just made no sense to fight that anymore. man, okay, I learned what I learned. The Young family, I think it was, so Malcolm Young, Angus Young, the two core members of AC/DC, brothers, born in Scotland, moved to Australia. Their formative years were really in Australia, and they were from a clan, a family of, I think, 8 or 9 siblings. I think it was 8. One of them was a girl only, the rest boys. And like, I think between Angus Young, who was the youngest, and his oldest brother, there was 20 years gap. So, and they come from really rough scrabble city in Scotland. So they had this, like, it's in their blood to just be fighters. Malcolm, the older, was, someone that Angus respected and looked up to as a kid. And then when he finally got a chance to be in a band with him, he was just, they were both kind of surprised, both brothers, that it would happen. But at the same time, they kind of both knew it might happen, So there's a sense of family, for sure, but I would say it's more like a sense of clan, because the AC/DC guy is not necessarily that, I don't know, there's definitely some sense of loyalty, but the fringe members outside of Angus and Malcolm, pretty much everyone else was a fringe member. Bon Scott was part of the core because he was so instrumental in framing the voice and the atmosphere and the attitude of the band. And then when he passed away in 1980, they got the perfect replacement, maybe in rock history, Brian Johnson. And he also became this kind of triangular Malcolm, Angus, and Brian Johnson. But still, he definitely didn't replace Bon's role in their heart. Bon was Bon, and Brian's this new guy, and they had a very good chemistry, but at a certain point, Brian Johnson, he wrote lyrics for the first Back in Black, For Those About to Rock, Flick of the Switch, Fly on the Wall. I don't think Who Made Who, maybe. There's only 3 originals on that album. And then Blow Up Your Video. So about 5 albums he wrote lyrics, and then he kind of gave up. He was like, I don't know if it felt too much pressure for it. And then the lyric writing went totally to Angus and Malcolm, songwriting and lyrics. So they just, from then, all writing credits were pretty much theirs. That began like 1990 with the Razor's Edge. So, like I'm saying, Angus and Malcolm were the group, really. Phil Rudd was a very key player in the sound as well, being the drummer that had that rock solid yet slightly swinging rock and roll feel, and sparse. He left when things got ugly in the early 80s. He was getting burnt out and came to heads with Malcolm when Malcolm was drinking too much. And so anyway, he disappeared for about 10 years. Then he came back, but his coming back forced AC/DC to kind of dismiss the drummer they had, Chris Slade, at the time. Chris Slade actually quit on his own, I think, because he got the drift. But, that's a little weird. I get how AC/DC wants to return to the original sound, but they were building something with this new guy, Chris Slade. They did Razor's Edge with him, then the 1992 live album, and they were working on the demos for the 95 Ball Breaker album. And then they just said, hey, Chris Slade, I think we're going to go back with Phil Rudd. Whatever. I think the fans were not disappointed, but I don't know if that's how that sits with me sort of ethically. But it's business, right? Huge, big, tremendous business, AC/DC. So I do think they're decent guys, for sure. Wild as well. but probably more wild on stage than off stage, with the exception of Bon Scott. Maybe Phil Rudd was a little wild off stage. Cliff Williams, you don't hear much about. It seems like a guy, the bassist, who finally took the position and filled it in, I think shortly before Highway to Hell album. I think that's how that went. Power Ridge, maybe. Yeah. But in those early days, there was a lot of lineup changes. So Bon Scott, known as the voice of AC/DC, the guy who sings Highway to Hell and everything, he was the second singer. There was a guy named Dave Evans before that, and probably even like one guy before Dave Evans that there was, but it was just very brief. Anyway, just some random pictures here. You know, early days. This guy is Mark Evans, a bass player before Cliff Williams. There's Bon, Mark Evans. This is Angus Young. This is Phil Rudd. This is Malcolm Young. So Malcolm and Angus, two very small guys, were the engine, the main engine of the whole thing. And of course, Bon was key. There's Angus and Bon Scott. Bon Scott was like 8 years older. 8 to 10 years older than some of the guys. So he was later in his career. I'm just seeing if there's any great stand-up. There's a lot of great pictures here. Then of course you're going to get pictures of Brian Johnson era. These guys were born to rock. There's just no two ways about it. And they're small guys and scrappy. A lot of fighting. I think you had to kind of be a fighter to some degree. Back in, is Brian Johnson. Back in the day, if you're gonna like conquer the world like they did. But it is more like a self-defense thing. I don't, unless, you know, yeah, or like losing their patience type of thing. But yeah, it was a rough life, and there's definitely sex, drugs, and rock and roll a lot. But pretty early on, Angus Young got married anyway. I don't know exactly the rest of them. Angus Young got married before Bon Scott died, like the same month or maybe a month before or something like that. Or anyway, right around the same time, which he would have been pretty young. Born 55, yeah. So it had been mid-20s or something when he got married. But yeah, it was a lot of excess, certainly in the late 70s when they were getting big and storming the world. But one of the things I enjoy about AC/DC so much is that they're like very clear. We're going to sing about lowbrow sort of sex, and they don't really sing about drugs. They sing about drinking or having wild party type of thing. Sex and drinking, and you know, doing bad stuff like dirty deeds done dirt cheap, like petty crimes or sometimes nasty stuff, fighting. But they've been dubbed satanic from here now and again. I never felt that, but you could certainly see why from a, let's say, a Christian standpoint, or from the point of view of someone who's not into that type of music. But I never felt they were satanic because they have a great camaraderie and they make me happy when I listen to them, and they make millions of people throughout the world happy by them just existing and playing their loud music. And it was so funny, like Angus Young performing night after night, so much touring these guys did, and he would just wreck his body night after night, sweating like crazy. He said at one point that even worse than I forget how he worded it, but the wear and tear on the guitar was largely from his sweat, that the guitar was getting waterlogged and like rusting the metal pieces. Every week they had to like switch things out. So, and he was a teetotaler, which means someone who doesn't drink alcohol. Bon Scott was someone who drank a whole lot of alcohol. Malcolm Young was a drinker. I think, I don't know about Cliff Williams or Phil. I'm pretty sure Phil was a drinker. Brian Johnson, probably. I don't know if he had a big problem with it, but I imagine he's a drinker. But Malcolm did have a problem with it at some point, and Bon, he arguably drank himself to death at the age of 33. That was a big shock to the rock world, anyway, for sure. So I don't know. It was just so cool to see their evolution album to album and how they interrelate with each other and to learn their characters. And one other fun thing was that Malcolm, I always used to hear the criticism or say it myself that their albums sound the same. Each album sounds the same, which it does. It's the AC/DC sound. And once Malcolm commented, I think it was in the 90s or after that, being in the studio is the hard part because it's not easy to write albums that sound the same because they are different, and yet you have to make them sound the same because that's their kind of like their ethic was, this is the AC/DC sound, we got to keep it. And they got that ethic, that work ethic, which was a super successful model, from their brother George Young, who was in a band called the Easy Beats.
Please listen to Friday on My Mind.
Yeah, check out the song Friday on My Mind by the Easy Beats, 66 or 67. George Young, brother of Malcolm and Angus, was a co-writer on that. George Young and Harry Vonda, two members of the Easy Beats. And they had this strong run. They were celebrities in their own right in Australia, and then they were starting to make it big and make a splash anyway in UK in the late 60s. And then it just started to kind of come apart, and part of it, George Young felt, was that they were like kind of redefining their sound too quick. They had a good sound, and then they were trying to like reinvent themselves with each album, and just like the Beatles and the Stones and they saw other people doing, but it didn't work for them. They got lost by doing that. So after that sort of failure, which is not really a failure, but he perceived it as such at the time, he wanted to, when he started to see his younger brother's band come up, he was like, you guys got to stick to your sound, create your sound and stick to it. And then, so George Young and Harry Vonda, two Easy Beats members, were the producers on the first, I want to say 8 AC/DC albums, maybe less, until right before, until Power Ridge, which was the one right before Highway to Hell. Highway to Hell switched to Mutt Lange, and then Back in Black was Mutt Lange. But yeah, that's when they really start to become worldwide sellers. But that sound that was really defined was through the brother George Young and Harry Vonda. And that's kind of a huge part of why they're super successful. Anyway, it was a blast to read. I loved it. I like the guys. They're endeared to my heart more than ever. I listened to a lot of AC/DC while reading it. I just couldn't get enough. It's so weird. It's so weird to me that I like them so much, but I really do. And anyway, AC/DC, Maximum Rock and Roll.
And one more thing.
Engleheart and Duriuex.
They have enough cowbell. So now, please hit the cowbell. Everyone.
Da-na-na. Da-na-na. Okay, till next time.
No, cowbell. Please.
Da-na-na. 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 Da-na-na.
Bye.